In Alaska, there is a town where almost everyone wakes up inside the same building. Outside, the wind comes off the water and cuts straight through the valley. Snow stacks against the walls, the temperature drops, and almost the entire town stays inside one 14-story building. They go to the store, the post office, the church, the clinic, the school, and they do it without stepping outside. To reach the rest of the world, they pass through a single tunnel cut straight through the mountain. One way in, one way out. But this is only the first of 7. 7 cities that by every reasonable measure should not exist. A city that moved underground to escape the heat. A city so high the air itself runs thin. A city with no land beneath it at all, built on the open sea, far from any shore. Each one looks impossible. Each one is real. And each one survives for the same hidden reason.
A normal city is built where life is easier. Near water you can drink, on land you can farm, in a climate that doesn't try to kill you. These 7 were built where life should have been harder. Under one roof, underground, above 5,000 meters, on a lagoon, on a rock in the sea, inside a legal void, and finally, on open water with no ground at all. The question is never just how they were built. It's why anyone agreed to stay. Because nobody pays this kind of price for nothing.
Chapter 1. Whittier, the town under one roof. Whittier sits on the edge of Prince William Sound, hemmed in by steep mountains and cold water. For most of the year, the setting is beautiful and brutal at once. Rain falls for days. Wind funnels down through the valley. In winter, snow can pile higher than a person. This is not a place that invites a sprawling town. So, the town stopped sprawling. Almost the entire population of Whittier lives inside a single building. Beggish towers. 14 stories of concrete rising alone above the harbor. People wake up there, sleep there, raise children there. And many of the things a town normally spreads across blocks and streets are folded into the same walls. A small store, a post office, a clinic, a church, city offices, even police. You can handle much of daily life without ever stepping outside. In a climate like this, that isn't strange. It's logical. When the weather turns hostile for months at a time, a town has 2 choices. Fight the cold every single day, or pull everything indoors and stop fighting. Whittier chose the second. There was even a covered passage connecting the building to the school, so children can cross in winter without facing the wind. It is, in practice, a one-building town. But the strangeness doesn't end at the walls, because Whittier is also almost sealed off from the rest of Alaska. To drive in or out, you pass through the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, a long passage cut straight through the mountain. For years, it was one of the longest tunnels of its kind in North America. And it has an unusual rule. It is shared. Cars and trains use the same single lane, taking turns. The direction of traffic reverses on a schedule. And at night, the tunnel closes. When it closes, the town is effectively cut off until morning. One way in, one way out, on a timer. To understand why anyone built here at all, you have to go back to the military. Whittier began as a strategic port during the Second World War. The mountains hid it. The deep water made it useful. The tunnel was driven through the rock to connect it to the region. The soldiers eventually left, but the port, the access, and the buildings remained. And people stayed. Because Whittier still had something worth keeping. A sheltered harbor, a working connection to the sea, a reason to absorb the cold, the isolation, and the dark. That is the first version of the pattern. When the outside world becomes too harsh to live in normally, a town can survive by collapsing inward into one structure, behind one tunnel, around one reason to stay.
But heat can be just as hostile as cold. And the next city didn't pull its people indoors, it pulled them underground.
Chapter 2: Coober Pedy, the desert city that moved underground. In the desert of South Australia, there is a town that hides from its own sky. From above, Coober Pedy barely looks like a town at all. The ground is dry and reddish. Low mounds of pale rock sit in rows. Thin pipes rise out of the earth at odd angles. There are streets, there are signs, but many of the homes are missing because they're below the surface. The reason is the heat. Out here, summer temperatures often climb above 40 degrees Celsius. The sun is relentless. There is little shade and little relief.
Building a normal town on the surface would mean fighting that heat every hour of every day. So the town went down instead of up. People dug into the rock and built their homes inside it. These underground houses are called dugouts, and the logic behind them is simple. A few meters below the surface, the temperature barely moves. While the desert above swings between burning days and cold nights, the rock stays steady, often somewhere in the low to mid-20s. No air conditioning required. The earth does the work. Step inside, and it doesn't feel like a cave. There are bedrooms, living rooms, curved ceilings cut straight from the stone. And it didn't stop at houses. Over time, the underground filled with everything a town needs. There are underground churches with arches carved from solid rock, underground hotels, underground museums, bars and shops, all sheltered from the sun. A whole layer of ordinary life moved beneath the desert floor. But none of this happened because people wanted novelty. It happened because of what was found here. Opal. Coober Pedy became one of the most important opal mining areas in the world, and that single fact explains the entire town. People didn't come to the middle of a brutal desert for the view. They came for what was buried in the ground. The opal was the reason. The heat was the obstacle. And going underground was the solution that made both possible at once. It's why the surface looks the way it does. Those mounds are mining debris. Those pipes are ventilation, feeding air to the spaces below. The landscape itself is a byproduct of the search. In most towns, the surface is where life happens, and the underground is forgotten. Here, it's reversed. The surface is for working and digging. The cool, quiet, livable part is underneath. Coober Pedy is the second version of the pattern. When the surface turns unlivable, a town doesn't have to leave. It can move into the rock and take its homes, its faith, and its comfort with it. But heat can be survived. What happens when the very air starts to disappear? Because the next city sits so high that breathing itself becomes the problem. Chapter 3: Rinconada, the city where the air runs out. High in the Peruvian Andes, there is a city where the air can barely keep you alive. Rinconada sits at around 5,100 meters above sea level. That makes it one of the highest permanent settlements anywhere in the world. At this altitude, there is roughly half the oxygen you'd find at sea level. The cold is constant. The slope is steep. A glacier hangs above the rooftops. For a newcomer, simply walking uphill can leave the body gasping. Nothing about this place suggests a city should be here. And yet, by various estimates, tens of thousands of people live in it. The reason is buried in the mountain: gold. There is gold in the rock beneath Rinconada, and that single fact pulls people up the slope despite everything working against them. The settlement has grown quickly and informally. Buildings climb the hillside in tight, improvised rows. metal sheeting, mud, narrow paths between structures. Services struggle to keep up with the constant arrival of people chasing the same thing. And the work itself is hard and dangerous. Miners often labor under a system frequently described by the local term cachorreo. Under this arrangement, as it's commonly reported, a worker spends most of their time mining without a regular wage and is allowed to keep whatever ore they can carry out in a limited window at the end. That ore might hold a fortune, or almost nothing. It is a gamble paid in time and risk. The dangers don't end inside the tunnels. Processing the gold often involves mercury, a toxic metal that can contaminate the surrounding environment and the people exposed to it. The combination is brutal. Thin air, cold, hazardous work, pollution, limited sanitation. Health conditions here are often described as severe, and life expectancy among miners is frequently reported as very low. This is a place where the body pays a continuous price simply for staying. So why does anyone come? Because of what the mountain might give back. For many, La Rinconada is a calculated bet. Endure the altitude, endure the cold and the danger, and hope that the rock holds enough gold to make it worth it. That is the trade at the center of the city. Oxygen, health, and stability on one side, the possibility of gold on the other. It is the third version of the pattern, and one of the harshest. People don't climb to the edge of breathable air for comfort. They climb because something up there is valuable enough to risk their lungs, their health, and their years. But at least in the mountains, there is solid ground to stand on. The next city doesn't even have that, because some people built their entire world on the surface of the water. Chapter 4. Makoko, the city built on water. On the edge of Lagos, Nigeria, there is a community that floats. Makoko stretches across the water of the Lagos Lagoon, built not on solid ground, but above it. Wooden houses stand on stilts driven into the lagoon bed. They sit close together, connected not by roads, but by water. Here, the streets are made of water. People move by canoe. Goods move by canoe. Children are paddled to school by canoe. It is a full community, organized entirely around the surface of a lagoon. Makoko has long been home to families from the Egan people, with deep roots in fishing. Generations have lived here, making a living from the water beneath their homes. By some counts, the wider settlement holds a very large population, though estimates vary widely, with figures sometimes cited as high as the hundreds of thousands. What's clear is that this is not a handful of houses. It is a dense, working water community. But life here is precarious in more ways than one. There is little formal sanitation. Clean water is hard to secure. And crucially, many residents have no secure legal claim to the place they live. That last point matters enormously, because just beyond Makoko, the city of Lagos rises into a skyline of towers and wealth. The contrast is stark. On one side, a floating settlement with no land title. On the other, some of the most valuable real estate in the country. And valuable waterfront has a way of attracting pressure. For years, Makoko has lived under the threat of demolition, tied to the city's redevelopment ambitions. That pressure has flared repeatedly across the past decades, and it returned with force again recently. Beginning in late December 2025 and continuing into early 2026, authorities carried out a wave of demolitions across parts of the waterfront. Officials cited safety concerns near high-voltage power lines. Residents and rights groups described something far larger, clearances reaching deep into the community, well beyond the stated limits. By different accounts, thousands of people were displaced, with some estimates running well into the tens of thousands. Reports of injuries and serious harm emerged during the operation, though accounts differ across sources. Families ended up sleeping in their boats, their possessions floating beside them. Eventually, after protest and legal pressure, the demolitions were ordered suspended. But for those already displaced, the damage was done. This is the fourth version of the pattern, and a painful one. When there is no affordable land in a swelling megacity, people don't simply vanish. They build a place to live out of the only space left, the water. They turn canoes into cars and a lagoon into a neighborhood. And then they fight, often against far more powerful forces, just to keep standing on the surface they built. But not every city on the water was built by people with nothing. Some were built by industry and engineered down to the last block. Because off the coast of Japan, a single rock was turned into a machine.
Chapter 5: Hashima, the island that became a concrete machine. Off the coast near Nagasaki, in Japan, there is a small island that looks like a warship. Its real name is Hashima, but most people know it by a nickname, Gunkanjima, or Battleship Island, because from a distance, its silhouette of concrete and seawall resembles a ship of war. Up close, it is something stranger. A tiny rock in the sea, packed end to end with crumbling concrete buildings. Today, it stands empty, but it was once one of the most densely populated places on Earth. To understand how, you have to look beneath the island.
The reason Hashima existed was coal. There was a rich coal seam running under the seabed here, and that made this barren rock extremely valuable. The industrial company Mitsubishi developed the mine, and the island was transformed to serve it. The rock was expanded with reclaimed land, a protective seawall was built around it, and on that small walled platform, an entire vertical town was constructed. Concrete apartment blocks rose several stories high, pressed tightly together. Thousands of people lived here, miners and their families, in one of the highest population densities ever recorded. And everything they needed was crammed onto the island with them. A school, a hospital, shops, public baths, even a cinema. A complete community sealed onto a rock in the sea, built around a hole in the ground that produced coal. But the island's history carries a darker chapter as well. Its industrial story also includes a memory of forced labor during Japan's wartime period, a part of its past that shouldn't be erased by its dramatic ruins. For decades, the mine ran, the town lived, the coal flowed. And then the world changed. Japan began shifting from coal to oil. The seam that justified the entire island became less and less worth extracting. And once the coal lost its value, the reason for the island lost its value too. In 1974, the mine closed. And almost overnight, the people left. A place that had helped thousands was abandoned in a remarkably short span of time.
The apartments emptied. The school fell silent. The seawall now guards a town of no one. Today, Hashima is a ruin. Concrete slowly losing its fight with the salt and the storms. It is the fifth version of the pattern, and one of the clearest. This was never really a city in the ordinary sense. It was a machine for extracting coal with homes attached. When the coal mattered, the machine ran, and the rock was worth living on. When the coal stopped mattering, the machine switched off and the island emptied. A city's reason for existing can vanish. And when it does, the buildings can outlive the people by decades. But this island, at least, was planned. The next city had no plan at all. It simply grew, upward, inward, and almost without rules. Chapter 6: Kowloon Walled City, the densest city without a plan. In Hong Kong, there was once a city packed so tightly the daylight barely reached the ground. It was called Kowloon Walled City, and for decades it grew into one of the most densely populated places the world has ever seen. From the outside, it looked like a single enormous structure. Hundreds of separate buildings had risen so close together that they effectively merged into one continuous block of concrete, wires, and pipes. To understand how this happened, you have to understand its strange legal status. The site began as a Chinese military outpost.
As the surrounding territory came under British control, the walled city was left in an unusual position, a kind of jurisdictional gray zone, where clear authority was contested and enforcement was weak. Into that gap, people came. Refugees and newcomers settled here, and with little formal oversight of construction, they built, floor by floor, building onto building.
With no overall plan and few enforced limits, the structures climbed upward and pressed together until the city became a single dense mass. Inside, it was a world of its own. Corridors ran like tunnels between the buildings, many of them dark, narrow, and damp. Water pipes traced the walls. Fluorescent lights replaced the sun in passages that never saw daylight. Above, the rooftops became another layer entirely, a patchwork of antennas where residents went for air and children played. And life inside was not just survival, it was a full functioning society. There were factories, food stalls, schools, doctors and unlicensed dentists drawing patients from outside.
Families raising children in tiny apartments stacked dozens to a building. Yes, crime existed here, and the city gained a reputation tied to organized groups and illicit business. But that was never the whole story. Alongside it ran ordinary life. Work, family, community, neighbors who knew each other in the crowded dark. Where formal law was thin, people built their own informal order to keep the place running. The city, in effect, organized itself. But it couldn't last. By the late 20th century, authorities decided to clear it. Residents were compensated and relocated, and between 1993 and 1994, the walled city was demolished. In its place today stands a park. Calm, open, almost the exact opposite of what stood there before. Kowloon Walled City is the sixth version of the pattern. The others were shaped by nature, by cold, heat, altitude, water, and resources. This one was shaped by a gap in the wall. When official authority failed to organize the space, the people inside organized it themselves, vertically, densely, and on their own terms.
It proved that a city doesn't always need a plan to exist. Sometimes it just needs a space the rules forgot. But there is one more city, and it may be the most impossible of all, because it wasn't built on harsh land or contested land. It was built where there was no land at all.
Chapter 7, Neft Dashlari, the city built on the open sea. Far out in the Caspian Sea, off the coast of Azerbaijan, there is a city standing on the open water. No coastline, no island, just the sea in every direction, and a network of roads and buildings rising above it on stilts and platforms. Its name is Neft Dashlari, which means oil rocks, and it was built for one reason. There was oil beneath the seabed here, far from any shore. To reach it, engineers did something extraordinary. They built a city out on the water itself. In the early days, to create a foundation in the open sea, old ships were reportedly sunk in place and used as the base for the first platforms. From there, the structure grew. Trestle roads were laid across the water on supports, linking platform to platform. Drilling rigs went up. And then, so did a town. There were dormitories where workers lived, a bakery, a clinic, a cinema. And in a detail that says everything about human stubbornness, soil was reportedly brought out from the mainland so that trees could be planted, a patch of green far out on the sea. At its peak, the scale was remarkable. By various accounts, the network of roads and bridges stretched for hundreds of kilometers, connecting the pieces of this offshore settlement into a working whole. Workers lived here in shifts, far from land, surrounded by water and the constant noise of extraction. It was, in effect, a full town on the sea, sustained entirely by the oil beneath it. But a city this exposed pays a constant tax to the elements.
Storms batter the structures, salt water eats at the metal, and the platforms require relentless maintenance just to stay standing. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, investment and upkeep became harder to sustain, and over time, many sections of the sprawling network deteriorated or collapsed into the sea. Parts of it still function today, but much of the original city has been reclaimed by the water it was built on. Neft Dashlari is the seventh and most extreme version of the pattern. Every other city on this list was built on land of some kind: frozen, scorching, thin-aired, flooded, tiny, or lawless. This one had no land at all, only oil under the sea and the will to go and get it. People didn't build a town in the middle of the Caspian because it made life easier. They built it because something valuable was down there, and that was enough to justify a city on the waves. 7 cities. 7 places that, on the surface, should not exist. It would be easy to see them as proof that people will live anywhere, that humans simply endure suffering for its own sake. But that's not what they show. Look closer, and the same quiet logic runs through every one. None of these places were chosen because life there was hard. They were chosen because something there was worth the hardship. A sheltered military harbor in the Alaskan cold, opal beneath the desert, gold inside the mountain, a place to live, on the water, for those with nowhere else, coal under the seabed, shelter inside a gap in the law, oil far out at sea. In each case, the value came first. The impossible city came second, as the price people were willing to pay to reach it. And that explains their fates. When the reason to stay remains, the city holds on, however brutal the conditions. When the reason disappears, when the coal runs out, when the law arrives, when the sea takes back the platforms, the city empties, collapses, or fades into ruin. That is the real pattern behind all 7. A city is never really built on land or rock or water. It's built on a reason. And a city lasts only as long as people have a reason to keep paying the price of living there.
Yeah.